You most likely eat corn in some form every single day, even if you don't know it. With high fructose corn syrup in many of our daily foods, it's very difficult to avoid eating corn. But corn is actually a really strange plant, and like most plants, a little kinky. Brew up your favorite tea and let's dive into the amazing story of corn. You might just be gobsmacked at the truth. Corn hails from its wild ancestor teosinte, a wild grass. Corn was domesticated from the teosinte plant about 9,000 years ago in southern Mexico by indigenous peoples of the region. If you take a look at teosinte, it looks nothing like corn. The grains of teosinte have a thick, tough shell, so getting a meal out of it would be quite a lot of work. Teosinte grains also usually fall off the cob when they're ripe, which is not a great trait for a crop, as half of your yield would end up in the dirt. So let's talk about flowers. Flowering plants generally fall into two categories, monoecious and dioecious. If a plant is monoecious, that means that one single plant possesses both male and female parts. Essentially, they're hermaphrodite. If a plant is dioecious, one plant has male parts, or pollen, and the other has female parts, i.e. seeds and ovaries. This means in dioecious species, male plants don't produce seeds, only the females do. Corn is a monoecious plant. The silks, the female part of the flower, come out of each ear of corn, but the male parts come out in what's called a tassel at the very top of the plant. Imagine you had a dick and balls growing from your head, but then also had a couple of vaginas growing on your arms and legs. Pretty weird, right? The corn that most people think of first is sweet corn. It's the kind that we butter up and eat. The thing that sets this corn apart is that the kernels produce fructose and other sugars instead of starch like most seeds do. This makes it sweet and perfect for eating on its own. Popcorn is interesting as it produces starch, but it has a thick layer of hardened starch surrounding a small center of soft starch. This allows pressure to build up inside of the kernel when cooking up to the point of bursting, where the starch puffs up like a foam. Dent corn, also commonly called field corn, is the most widely grown type of corn. It gets its name dent corn because when the kernels dry, they form a small dent at the top. This is because the kernel is mostly comprised of soft starch with a small amount of hard starch. So as the kernels dry, the lower density leads to a small divot forming. This is the usual corn used in cornmeal, tortillas, tamales, and more. It's also widely used in animal feed. Flint corn is similar to popcorn as it has a thick, hard starch layer, but most of the kernel is made up of the hard starch. It gets its name from the hardness of the kernels and how they fracture when they're crushed. This type of corn is used to make grits and coarse cornmeal, among other things. You've probably heard of GMO corn, but the way GMO corn is altered is interesting. Corn can be genetically modified to resist certain herbicides. This way, a farmer can spray pesticides that will kill everything except the corn. BT corn, another GMO type, is also really weird. BT stands for Bacillus thuringiensis, a bacteria which is found naturally in soil. B. thuringiensis has a cool trait though. It produces proteins called delta endotoxins. While these proteins are harmless to humans, specifically to caterpillars, they're deadly. If a caterpillar consumes some of these endotoxins, they cause perforations to the digestive system. Then, gruesomely, the bacteria from their own stomachs digest them from the inside out. In BT corn, genes are altered so the corn plant itself can create these endotoxins. And if a caterpillar eats some of this plant, well, you know what happens. So what makes corn so useful to us? Of course, the first thing you may think of is corn on the cob, tortillas, tamales, cornbread. Corn is an essential ingredient in these foods. However, a large portion of the corn grown in the United States is used to produce cornstarch and corn syrup. Corn syrup is produced by a reaction called hydrolysis and is made from cornstarch. High fructose corn syrup is corn syrup that has been further processed with an enzyme, xylose isomerase. This enzyme converts the glucose into fructose, which has a sweeter taste. Corn syrup is extensively used in our foods as well. Actually, almost all of our processed foods contain corn in some form. Basically, any soda you'll find at the store is sweetened with high fructose corn syrup. The main reason so many foods use high fructose corn syrup is the fact that it's actually sweeter than regular old sugar, and cheaper too. Feed grain is what people use to feed livestock, like cattle, goats, chickens, pigs, etc. In the United States, over 95% of the feed grain produced is comprised of corn. This is considering just the seed part. The foliage left over after harvesting can be fermented and stored for animal feed, which is called silage. Ethanol is a very useful chemical. It's a great solvent, but it's also a great fuel. Over 90% of the ethanol produced in the United States is derived from corn. Gasoline is mixed with a percentage of this ethanol. This is done in the hopes of reducing emissions. Every single part of the corn plant has some use to us. A problem arose when corn was exported to other countries. For those without a diverse diet that mostly relied on corn, bad things happened. A disease referred to as pellagra damaged corn's reputation. This disease was actually caused by a nutrient deficiency in niacin. They were missing one important step: nixtamalization. To nixtamalize corn, you take the dried kernels and boil them in lime or another alkali. The tough skin of the kernel disintegrates. Then chemical changes in the proteins and other nutrients happen in the alkaline solution, making them more bioavailable to the human body, one of these nutrients being niacin. This process is also paramount in giving tortillas and tamales their flavor and texture. All of us use corn in some form, whether filling up your stomach or your gas tank. So next time you eat corn on the cob, remember how much your life would be changed if we were to exist without it. Thanks, you weird mutant grass. You're awesome.